You have eaten a bird before. You have pulled the meat off the bone, dipped it in sauce, gone back for seconds. You did not think twice about it. But here is something strange. You have probably never eaten a crow. You have never sat down to a plate of seagull. You have never seen either of them on a menu, in a grocery store, or even in a recipe online. And that is bizarre, because crows and seagulls are everywhere. They are bold, loud, completely unafraid of humans. A seagull will steal a chip right out of your hand. A crow will stare you down like it owns the street. These birds are not rare. They are not protected by some ancient royal decree. They are not poisonous. And yet, across almost every culture on Earth, nobody eats them. Most people, if you ask them, will say something like, they are dirty birds. Or, they just do not taste good. But those answers are not the real answer. The real answer goes much deeper than taste. It goes into survival, psychology, disgust, and the invisible rules your brain runs on without telling you. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand something about your own mind that most people never think to question. Stay with this until the end. The last part is the part that actually changes how you see yourself. Let us start with the obvious question. Why do we eat some birds and not others? Chickens, turkeys, ducks, quail, pheasant. These are normal. These are food. But crows, seagulls, pigeons, vultures. These feel wrong. Not illegal, not impossible, just wrong. And that feeling, that gut-level wrongness, is not random. It was built. Your ancestors built it, and they built it for a very specific reason. Here is where it starts. Tens of thousands of years ago, humans were not farming. They were not raising chickens in a clean pen, they were surviving. And in a survival world, you learned very quickly which animals were safe to eat and which ones would kill you. One of the fastest rules your brain developed was this: watch what the animal eats. If it eats clean things, grass, seeds, insects, it is probably safe. If it eats rotten things, dead things, waste, be very careful. Crows eat carrion. That means dead animals, rotting flesh, roadkill. Seagulls eat garbage, fish scraps, anything they can find on a beach or in a landfill. Vultures eat nothing but decaying carcasses. Your ancient brain looked at that behavior and drew a line. That animal is downstream of death. Do not put it in your body. And here's the key part. That was not irrational. It was correct. Animals that eat rotting meat carry bacteria that can kill you. Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter. These spread through the food chain. So the disgust your brain fires when you imagine eating a crow is not weakness. It is an ancient immune system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Researchers in evolutionary psychology, including Paul Rozin at the University of Pennsylvania, have spent decades studying this. Rozin found that disgust is not just an emotion, it is a disease-avoidance system. And one of the most reliable triggers for disgust is contact with animals that are associated with decay and waste. The brain codes those animals as contaminated. Not just the animal, the idea of the animal. Even a perfectly cooked crow, raised in a clean environment, eating only safe food, will still trigger that disgust response in most people, because the brain does not run a fresh calculation every time. It runs a rule. Crow equals scavenger equals danger. Do not eat. That rule was written thousands of years ago, and it is still running in you right now, but here is what makes this even stranger. The rule is not universal. It is cultural, and that tells you something important. In some parts of the world, people do eat crow. In parts of rural America in the early 20th century, crow was eaten during times of hardship. The phrase eating crow, meaning to accept an embarrassing defeat, actually came from the idea that eating crow was something you only did when you had no other choice. That alone tells you everything. It was not a delicacy, it was a last resort, a humiliation food, which means the taboo around it was already so strong that eating it carried social shame, not just physical risk. And that is where the second layer of this story begins. Because disgust is not just biology, it is social. Humans are deeply tribal animals, and food is one of the most powerful markers of group identity that exists. What you eat signals who you are. What you refuse to eat signals it even louder. The anthropologist Marvin Harris wrote extensively about food taboos in his 1985 book, Good to Eat. He argued that most food taboos, including the avoidance of certain animals, have a rational foundation buried underneath them. Usually it comes down to cost and benefit. Pigs were taboo in ancient Middle Eastern cultures partly because pigs require shade, water, and grain. In a hot, dry desert environment, they were expensive to raise and offered limited benefit over goats and sheep. The taboo made ecological sense. Now apply that thinking to crows and seagulls. These birds are hard to catch in large numbers. They are not herd animals. You cannot pen them. You cannot breed them easily. Their meat is lean, gamey, and tough, and the effort required to catch enough of them for a meaningful meal is enormous compared to hunting a deer or raising a chicken. The return is low. The effort is high. The risk, eating a scavenger that has been consuming waste, adds one more reason to say no. So the taboo became efficient. Do not waste your time on crow. Chase something better. And once a taboo becomes efficient, it stops needing a conscious reason. It becomes a feeling, and feelings are passed down. Children do not need to be taught that crow is disgusting. They pick it up from the reactions of adults around them. They see no one eating it. They hear no one talking about preparing it. And that silence is information. The brain fills the silence with a rule. That is not food. Now here is the part where seagulls get interesting, because seagulls add another layer that crows do not have. Seagulls are legally protected in many countries. In the United Kingdom, all wild birds are protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981. Killing a seagull, even one that just stole your sandwich, is actually illegal. In the United States, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 protects most wild bird species, including seagulls, from being killed or captured without a federal permit. So there is a legal wall on top of the cultural wall. And laws, over time, reinforce culture. When something is illegal, it becomes harder to even imagine doing it. The brain registers it as forbidden, and forbidden slides very easily into disgusting. So the seagull is now triple locked. Evolutionary disgust, cultural taboo, legal protection, that is a very secure do not eat signal. But now let us look at crows specifically, because crows are one of the most intelligent animals on the planet, and that changes things. Researchers at the University of Washington, led by John Marzluff, ran a series of experiments in the 2000s showing that crows can recognize individual human faces. Not just shapes. Faces. They can remember a specific person who wronged them years later. They hold grudges. They warn their flock about dangerous humans. They have been documented using tools, solving multi-step puzzles, and even engaging in play. Their intelligence is roughly comparable to that of a 7-year-old human child in certain problem-solving tasks. And here is where it gets psychologically uncomfortable. Humans have a very hard time eating animals they recognize as intelligent. It is why most people in Western cultures are deeply uncomfortable with eating dog or dolphin. It is why the idea of eating a chimpanzee feels viscerally wrong. Intelligence creates identification. When you recognize that an animal has a mind, that it remembers, plans, feels, the disgust system gets a massive boost from a different direction. Now, it is not just biological contamination risk. Now it feels like something closer to a moral violation. Paul Rozin called this the moral dimension of disgust. Things that feel like they cross a moral line trigger the same neural circuitry as physical disgust. And eating a crow, an animal smart enough to remember your face, to grieve its dead, to play, starts to feel morally wrong, not just physically risky, which is a remarkable thing for a bird to achieve. Crows effectively made themselves inedible by being too interesting. Now step back for a second, because what you have just learned is not really about birds, it is about you. Every single day, you make hundreds of decisions that feel like simple personal preferences. I do not like that. That is not food. That seems wrong, and you assume those feelings are yours, that they come from your own reasoning, your own experience, your own taste. But many of them were written before you were born. They were handed down through culture, through discussed programming, through ecological logic that no longer applies to your life but still runs quietly underneath your choices. You do not eat crow because your ancestors built a rule and your brain inherited it. You do not eat seagull because a law solidified a cultural wall that evolution had already started building. And none of that was ever explained to you. You just felt it. And that is the strange thing about being human. Most of the invisible rules governing what you do, what you find disgusting, who you trust, what feels right and wrong, were installed without your permission, long before you were old enough to question them. The crow is just the most visible example. It is sitting on a wire above you right now, watching you with eyes that remember faces. And somewhere in your brain, without you deciding, a line was already drawn. And you have never once thought to ask who drew it.